why not sit back, relax, and take things easy like a Sunday morn? I'm your host, Shane Lockwood, and this is episode 78 of Easy Like a Sunday Morn. And today is the 26th of May 2019, and it's great to be back. It's been ages since I've done a podcast episode, and I'm a little bit annoyed at myself that's becoming a running theme for this particular podcast. But a lot has happened, and it's prevented me from actually sitting down and being able to record anything. I want to say thank you to everybody who who downloaded the previous episode. I was very grateful that people were actually listening to that. That was not really a eulogy, but an honouring of a now former friend who passed away from cancer, and I didn't get the chance to say goodbye, so that was my way of saying goodbye. And I want to say thank you to everybody who supports the show, whether through Patreon donations which do help, by the way. I should explain that at some point, why people do Patreon donations, I think, so that it's not out of greed, it's so that the podcast can support itself. So if, for example, this podcast was generating enough money where I didn't actually have to go out and work physically, then I could do this full time. I could produce more podcasts, I could put more research into what I was doing, and just improve the average experience for you guys as well. So that's what I was trying to do with the podcast. It allows me to pay for, as it is, it allows me to pay for storage space. I've just had to renew my Spreaker subscription. There are people that do podcasts for free, but you'll find very often that they'll delete their episodes. And that's fine, but if you want to advertise and grow your podcast, you do have to have a backlog of stuff that people can go through. People will go through your old stuff. With this particular one, it gets to a certain point, and then people will stop. But I do want to say thank you for everybody listening to this for the very first time as well. Now, on to why I wasn't in front of the microphone previously. I'll just go through my notes here. I had an accident at work. Now, what had happened was it was a bad day at work. It was one of those weird days that you just knew it was going to be a bit rough or something bad was going to happen. And this particular day, the supervisor said, okay, you can work with this guy over here, and you need to do X, Y, Z, just clean that level, whatever. So anyway, this guy refused to say good morning to me. He refused to say hello to me. And the whole day he was just barking orders at me, and he wasn't a supervisor. He didn't have any position of authority. He was just pushing me and pushing me and pushing. He mistakenly said, all this work's got to be done before we leave today, when the supervisor said, no, you've got all day tomorrow as well. So he was in the wrong. So anyway, long story short, he was pushing me, and I started to get fatigue. I started to get chafing between my legs. Excuse me for that. A little bit personal there, but it made it difficult to walk. Then the people that I was working to, they would just become cold towards me. Don't know why, they just became cold towards me. Then what had happened was they'd left. It was like 25 past 3 instead of 3:30, and they decided to leave. Okay, so I had to go back and get my bag, and I come back. As I'm coming down the stairs, I see them, and they said, hold the elevator. So as I'm trying to put my phone no longer doesn't work properly, and a power bank into my bag, I was also moving fairly quickly down the stairs. They said, hold the elevator. I sped up. I slipped, lost my balance, and then tried to regain my footing and then couldn't, and slipped at the end of the stairs there was a large metal pipe. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to include photos for Patreon listeners and those who are fans on the Facebook group of the pipe itself and me just pulling a funny in your face. But to protect myself, because I had a bit of split-second thinking to be able to do it, I clenched my hand into a fist and put it on my right fist on my right rib cage, and it's my right fist and rib cage that hit the metal water pipe, and that basically crushed my hand, and I couldn't touch my index, the pinky finger with my thumb, or the next one up with my thumb, because I was just in too much pain. And the ribs just hurt. So I went and got x-rays and stuff like that. No broken bones. I just couldn't move my hand for a while. There was no strength in it and stuff like that. Even now, there's a little bit of a tiny twinge in some of the ligaments, but I'm perfectly healed and there's no pain in my rib cage. But I was on painkillers for about a month, and then I went to the doctors, and then they discovered that I had high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and type 2 diabetes. So I'm now enrolled in the type 2 diabetes support groups and stuff like that. I'm in medication, and I've got to basically get a needle and draw blood from my finger every few hours and check my blood sugar levels and stuff like that. So there's all this sort of stuff going on, and I hope everybody's slowing down. Like, the purpose of this podcast, if you're very new and you just think, hang on, what's this guy on about? The purpose of this podcast is to slow people's breathing down by breathing in slowly, breathing out slowly. You're sitting back and you're relaxing and you're having a beverage or two. And you can think about whatever you want to do for 30 minutes or so. It's just a way of, like a meditation almost, where you can just slow your mind down and basically give yourself the space to actually plan what you want to do for the rest of the week, and like let go of all the garbage that you've had to deal with through the previous work week, and just have a bit of a reset. And that's the idea behind the podcast. Well, it wasn't originally, but that's what it's starting to become, and people can relax and then meditate. Some people just like the sound of my voice, and they get like an ASMR effect out of it. That wasn't intentional, but hey, I'll take it. So I'm back at work again, and I was scared that I'd lose my job. I was on work cover, which wasn't a pleasant experience, because you've got to go through the doctor's notes and stuff like that, and there was a touch and go period where I may or may not have been an employee, and I don't know. Because of the casual nature of the way that I work, who knows, they could say, well, you're back at work, we're paying you, we don't need to do this. But anyway, all the job search agency was like, oh well, you've damaged your reputation with this company, and I don't think they're going to take you on anymore. You've lost your job. You will have to keep you looking for the work and stuff like that. And I thought, okay. And a lot of people say, I know you've lost your job. So when I told them, I know I'm working again, they said, oh, gee, you've got a good employer. I'm thinking, well, no. I had to find out the law, and the law is that they cannot sack you for a work injury at their expense. So, but the hospital that I'm working at, because it's a construction clean, so I'm cleaning beginning, during, and after tradespeople have been in and created like a whole heap of toxic dust and stuff like that. So the hospital tried to charge the company that I worked for a cleanup, but I hadn't actually left any mess, so I don't know what's going on there. But anyway, that's 10 minutes of my life. That's why I haven't been podcasting of late, but I am going to get back into the saddle, and I am going to be doing small regular podcasts with a tighter focus. That's my promise to Patreon listeners only, but I will be doing this podcast as well. On to TV news. I had a new job interview for a horrible job at Telstra. It was an incoming call center where every single client was angry. Like they were on the verge of quitting Telstra, leaving Telstra, and as a service. Like they weren't going to use them as a service provider, and your job was to then talk them down, calm them down, and then try and resell them on an alternative Telstra product or whatever. And when I was at the interview, I had a dress shirt on. I decided against a tie because I didn't want to be more dressed than the person giving the interview, but I still wanted to be presentable. So decent shirt, slacks, and good shoes. And there were people there, and I don't know who they decided to hire, but there were people there that appeared to be, how could you put it, like really high-end employees and staff members and people that they worked for banks, they worked for insurance companies and all this sort of stuff. I think, why would you bother applying for a job like that? You're not going to last very long if people are going to be screaming and yelling at you and carrying on, right? But sometimes it's a stepping stone to other things. But those people must have felt pretty bad to have been gone from these high-end jobs to be scaled back from their companies. Obviously, these companies cut costs, they cut employees, and high-end executives and things every now and again have to go. But to think that these people that are well-dressed and all this sort of stuff having to be referred to these jobs by a job agency, like the fact that they're on welfare, is quite scary and unsettling. I mean, they spoke like professionals and things like that. I thought for a second that they were just ring-ins, like actors that they've just thrown into the job for, like the job interview, just to, I don't know, throw people off, I guess. But yeah, I've been watching, I wanted to say TV news. I've been watching a show called Sick of It. I've only seen the first 2 episodes. It's called, Sick of It by Carl Pilkington. And he was famous for being on a show called Idiot Abroad. And it was produced and edited and stuff by Ricky Gervais, which you may already know from other comedy shows like The Office and Derek, which is another brilliant show. Doom Patrol is pretty cool. I was aware of the comic book, not the original, but they did a reboot in the early 90s, I think, or late 80s, by Grant Morrison. And this is the TV show is based on the reboot by Grant Morrison, and some of it is pretty much scene for scene, and it's quite good. I'd recommend it, although it does have sex scenes and adult concepts, so maybe don't watch it in front of your kids and all that sort of stuff. It's very surreal and out there for a comic book movie, not a comic book TV show. The second season of The Orville was fantastic. Now, the first season was very rocky. The episodes are all over the place. The show didn't know what it was, whether it was a comedy, whether it was a drama, or what it was supposed to be. But in the second season, or towards the end of the first season, and then the entire second season, it knows what it is, and it's unapologetically as Star Trek can be without being in the Star Trek universe. It dealt with all sorts of issues like gender reassignment surgery and all sorts of like social political issues that we talk about right now, as all good sci-fi shows should at least. What else was there? Someone had recommended The Expanse, and a lot of people are talking about a show called The Expanse, and they love it. And I struggled through the first season of it, so I'm beginning to go into the second season, And that's the season where everybody says, "Oh, the second season, oh, it starts to get really good. You've just got to stick with it." Okay, so I'll do that. Finished all of Game of Thrones, and a lot of people were disappointed in the ending. I didn't know what to think of it. I think the second to last episode was probably one of the best things I've ever seen on television. You know, the dragons and special effects were absolutely fantastic. I think a lot of people were disappointed with the resolution to some of the characters, but I think actors like Peter Dinklage was fantastic. I was always a fan of the woman that played Arya Stark. I thought she had a lot of potential, and she's really like blossomed quite literally as a woman and as an actor. Please excuse me for saying that, but you know what I mean. But yeah, there's heaps of really cool shows that I like. I do watch Supergirl. It's a bit of a guilty pleasure. It's not the best show considering the source material. It could be a lot better, but it's just cheesy soap opera stuff with a superhero edge, I guess, superhero flavor. So that's that. I've been playing a game called Steam Monsters, and it's to do with a cryptocurrency called Steam, in which you every card that you play with is like a vest, an investment sort of thing, and they're worth real money. Not a whole lot of money, or some of them are actually quite valuable. Some of them are worth hundreds of dollars if you were lucky enough to get them at the time, or if you're rich enough now to actually buy them. But Steam Monsters is actually changing its name to Splinterlands, and they're moving away from the Steam cryptocurrency, and they are incorporating Tron, which is another cryptocurrency. So they're branching out in other cryptocurrencies and things like that. But I think it'll be, hopefully, it's because the game is very similar to Pokemon and Magic the Gathering. Hopefully it will start to take off. And as of course, I have a referral code in the show notes if you want to take a look at it. And for disclosure, I get 5% of any monies generated from that link, which all goes back into the podcast. Oh, and I worked at the Australian Electoral Commission's polling booth as a polling attendant during the recent election, and it was actually quite fascinating to see how they counted votes and how it all worked. I spent most of the morning just asking people for their names and addresses, and then handing out the ballot paper, the green ballot paper, which is for the House of Representatives, and the white paper, which was for the Senate seats, and then telling people you had to vote for a minimum of 6 above the line or a minimum of 12 below the line. And my brain became rather cooked when you have to go through the alphabet, not just the alphabet, but people's names, and then you have to go through the alphabet multiple times when you look up each name. So it's the person's surname, and then is it, where is it? Is it S? Is it S? So okay, S is that's after R and before T, and those sorts of things in your head all the time. And you have to do it as quick as you possibly can, and be polite as you possibly can as well. So that's one of those things that happened. And apparently you don't get paid until a good 19 days after the election. So I don't know what's going on there. I'll have to find out how much I get paid and whatnot. I'm also enrolled in a comedy course, a stand-up comedy course that'll be run by Glyn Nicholas, and it's being, I can't remember the word for it. The facilitator is a good friend of mine by the name of Steve Davis, and he runs the Adelaide Show podcast. It's a quite a good podcast. He does stuff every week, but again, he's a little bit more focused, has a lot more technology and equipment than I have. And it doesn't have the same sort of issues that I have. But that's that. So I'm back at work, and at the moment I'm just packing up everything, ready to go back to work. Got my helmet and my safety goggles and my glasses and my work boots. I bought a new pair of work boots on the bet that maybe I was going to be working again, and I will claim that back on tax because I think I might have a bit of a tax bill this year. I don't know what's going to happen, but we'll see what happens. And another little tax tip. No, I won't give out tax tips. I know there are people that actually listen to this that work for the tax department, and they did correct me on. No, they did. They said I was correct in a previous episode regarding the tax stuff because I was just quoting my accountant directly. But I won't be giving out tax information. You shouldn't be getting tax information from a podcast anyway. You should always talk to your accountant directly. And yeah. But I hope everybody has had a fantastic time in between podcasts and things. I will be doing a whole lot more of this sort of stuff. And hopefully I'll be talking about a whole lot more interesting things. And I'll be doing a rundown of the comedy course. I've just started some of the homework, and it starts officially next Sunday. So I don't know whether there'll be a podcast before then. There should be, but we'll see what happens. I've got to come up with at least 2 minutes of stand-up material, and I've got to watch a whole heap of stand-up comedians and try and pick apart their work and things like that. And I'm a little bit stuck. So I can be funny if I'm playing with material that's already there. It's easy to make a quip or a pun or a turn of phrase or have like a callback to something that somebody had said previously and then relate it to a current situation, and then people get a bit of a laugh on social media. But it's a different story when you have to stand up in front of a big crowd. It's not going to be a big crowd, but it might be 10, 20 people, and have to perform some comedy. And public speaking is my all-time number one fear. Every time I've gone to do some public speaking, or I've had to stand up in front of class and write on the whiteboard or something like that, I've always had like a brain freeze, and I'll just freeze, and your mind goes blank. You don't know what you're thinking. You don't know where you were or what you're supposed to be writing or saying, and everybody's looking and waiting, and then they laugh, and then they jeer, and then they boo. And yeah, I'm not really looking forward to that. But hopefully I will. It was a chance to meet Glenn Nicholas, I think, and that was the selling point. Really, I wouldn't have done it if Glenn Nicholas wasn't doing it, and he doesn't do every single doesn't do every time they do the comedy course. So this was big, I think, for me, because I was a fan of Glenn Nicholas. If you don't know who he was, he did a show called The Big Gig back in the late 80s, and I was in high school at the time, and it was a variety show where they had a whole heap of skits and comedy sets and musicians and entertainers and jugglers, and not jugglers so much, but just different performers, and everybody had an opportunity to showcase what they could do. And Glenn Nicholas was a master of mime and sound effects and characters and things like that. He was very, very funny and very, very popular. But he spent a lot of time doing stuff, directing things behind the scenes and whatnot. So that's what I'm worried about. That's what I'm working on. I hope. Feel free to let me know what you've been up to. I'm sort of winging this. I've got my notes here, but I just rambling a little bit. Also, I found out some rather negative news from a long-time listener, and he'd been accused of sexual assault with a minor. And I don't really want to go into that because that may trigger a few of my listeners, and I apologize if I just have done that. That wasn't my intention. And he would always comment on my podcast. He'd always listen to my podcast and things like that. He was a supporter, and now he's basically removed himself from the internet completely. And I don't blame him. I do blame him for the stuff that he did was pretty horrendous and unthinkable and unspeakable. And yeah, and that's rather unfortunate. One of those horrible, horrible things to have happen. So I used to have a code word, and please let me know. And the code word was done for him. Okay. If you want me to have a code word here, because I know that a few people will listen to the show and they use the code word at the end to generate passwords, or they'll use the letters from the code word to generate something or other. They'll put it into create an algorithm, and that becomes the password. Throw a couple of numbers, the front and the back, and you've got a password. So that's that really. There's a whole heap of stuff going on. I just finished today doing some charity work, working for the St. Vincent de Paul's. They've got a thing called Fred's Van, and it's basically, initially it was like a mobile soup kitchen where they would just park somewhere and hand out sandwiches and hot dogs and things. But they've moved into the 1225 building, which is like an outreach for anybody age 12 through to 25 to get help that they need. There's all sorts of courses, like computer courses. There's an 8-ball table, events, community stuff. They've got a radio station there that's 5 PBA FM, I think, from memory, and a few people that are mutual friends. Actually, I've met the people that did this during the podcast festival here in Adelaide. The people that do a show on 5 PBA FM about this time. Actually, I'm recording this at about 9 o'clock in the evening, but I hope that everybody can listen to this whenever they want to, and they get the relaxation and just the unwinding effect, just listening to my voice. And I'm not complaining this time. Hopefully, a few people have complained that all I do is like whinge about all the crap that happens, and sometimes that's the only content that happens. It's the negative stuff, and like this year has been rough, like really rough, and it was just one thing after another. It felt like death by 1,000 cuts. Just little things every day. Someone was just trying to correct me on Facebook, or trying to be irritable, or I'm offended by this meme. Of the hundreds of memes that I share every day, you chose to be offended by one of them, and it could have been any one of them. And you think, okay, hang on, you've thought more about the meme than what I had. And it's not about attacking anybody that was offended by memes. I make every effort. Hang on, I make every effort not to offend anybody. I'm actually largely apolitical. I used to be very into politics, but now I care in the sense that it's important if it affects me and my friends. So I wouldn't care who was president of the United States. With the last election, for example, I did care because I knew that things would be the way they are now if certain people got elected. Okay, and that's what happened, and it was an unthinkable thing, and But then again, there was a lot of corruption as well. There was no collusion, but there was conspiracy to commit corruption and all sorts of other weird and wonderful things. But anyway, that's me for this particular podcast, and hopefully I'll have something a whole lot more funny and for you guys, especially after this stand-up comedy course. And I'll probably learn how to write routines and things like that. Imagine a 30-minute comedy set. That would be insane. That would be easy, like a Sunday morning. Anyway, I hope that you have a fantastic time. Please take today and the rest of the week as easy as you possibly can, and I will catch you next time. Bye for now.